Ken Paxton claims Beto violated a court order that barred him and his nonprofit, Powered by the People, from fundraising efforts. So here to discuss his allegations is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He's also running for the U.S. Senate. So, Mr. Attorney General, let's talk to you about some of the comments that Beto made over the weekend. Listen here, and we'll get your response.
We punch first, and we punch harder. We want California and New Jersey and Illinois and Maryland and every other state where the Democrats hold the governor's mansion, the assembly, and the state senate to redraw their congressional districts now, not wait for Texas to move first, to maximize Democratic Party advantage. Listen, you may say to yourself, well, those aren't the rules. There are no refs in this game. The rules. We are going to win whatever it takes.
So is that why Beto's potentially getting locked up, or is there a bigger reason?
No, that's pretty much it. You saw it right there. There was already a temporary restraining order that stopped him from raising money, and he was at that rally clearly raising money for not political reasons, which would have been appropriate. He was raising it for personal expenses to help these Democrats in Texas evade their responsibilities. That's the problem, and he was ordered by a judge to stop fundraising, and he said, basically, he just continued to do it.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is actually losing in his efforts to silence Democratic activist Beto O'Rourke and shut down his political action committee, Powered by People. And you might want to celebrate this as a small victory for free speech in this country, and we could desperately use a victory in that realm, especially here in Texas. But don't get too excited just yet. Politics in Texas are a strange microcosm of hyper-conservative American politics, and look no further than the actions of our legally embattled Attorney General Ken Paxton, who, by the way, is currently running for Republican Senator John Cornyn's seat in Congress.
They are attempting to cheat. And, I think we all know Donald Trump is a cheater. Yeah. So is the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. In so many ways.
Paxton, who claims that Cornyn is not MAGA enough to represent Texans, even though Cornyn votes with Trump and Republicans nearly 100% of the time, is currently beating Cornyn in the polls, and that is not great because there is very little good to be said about Ken Paxton. He's achieved a somewhat national profile for his own misdeeds while holding the highest law enforcement position in our state. He is so disreputable that members of our Texas GOP have even tried to have him thrown out of office. At one point, he was saved from removal, by the way, at the last minute by our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. But when Texas Democrats made headlines by fleeing the state to deny quorum in an effort to prevent a completely unprecedented and surely illegally gerrymandered voting map from being adopted in the middle of a decade at the behest of the president, who, echoing his efforts surrounding the 2020 election, needed just 5 more seats from Texas, O'Rourke kicked his fundraising efforts into high gear, seeking to financially support the Texas Democrats in their efforts. And just a reminder to everyone, O'Rourke does not currently hold any office at the national or state level. He hasn't held public office since he left the House in 2019. He's garnered more headlines nationally for constantly running for things and then losing his races. But at the state level, he's constantly active when it comes to supporting other Texas Democrats and Texas residents. One could argue that Beto O'Rourke does more for Texans as a private citizen than many of our elected officials do, including, or perhaps especially more than Ted Cruz, who just narrowly won his re-election campaign against O'Rourke in 2018 and spends most of his time these days podcasting.
He's turned his powerful elected position into essentially a part-time job while he focuses his efforts on more satisfying work. Of course, I'm talking about his podcast, The Big Comfy Chair with Ted Cruz. The senator records 3 episodes a week, which is not nothing. Certainly sounds like a lot from a senator from the second most populous state in the country.
Okay, so here is a quick overview of how we got to where we are today. The Powered by People PAC donated over $1 million to the Texas House Democratic Caucus, the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, and the Mexican American Legislative Caucus. These donations benefited members regardless of whether or not they left the state to deny quorum, and that part is important because the crux of Paxton's argument is that O'Rourke cannot use political political funds to help lawmakers leave the state. A temporary restraining order was placed on O'Rourke and his PAC, preventing them from fundraising and distributing funds to the Democratic groups and leaders. But last week, the all-Republican 15th Court of Appeals undid the order on the grounds that it was an unconstitutional violation of free speech protections. The question today is not whether such activities can be punished after the fact, but whether they can be prohibited before they occur based on a suspicion that they might, the justices wrote in their unanimous ruling. At this stage, where little evidence has been offered, the latter would constitute an unconstitutional prior restraint of political activity that may or may not prove to be lawful. The Texas Supreme Court, which is entirely composed of Republicans, refused to step in. Paxton has claimed the ruling was a constitutional crisis, and he said that the 15th Court of Appeals, again all Republican, was seated with activist judges. O'Rourke's PAC has so far spent over $400,000 on legal fees pertaining to this fight against Paxton, but he wrote on his Substack, "If Paxton is successful in draining the remaining resources we use to run Powered by People through these expensive lawsuits, if he forces us to close our doors, we'll open new ones all across the state, all over the country." The PAC, Powered by People, has been around for a few years, but it was primarily a vehicle to register people to vote. Texas Democrats left the state in August of this year, and a month later, Paxton sued O'Rourke and his PAC, saying in a statement that lawmakers were likely accepting Beto bribes to underwrite their jet-setting sideshow in far-flung places and misleadingly raising political funds to pay for personal expenses. So, a judge in Tarrant County, and that's in Fort Worth, Texas, issued a temporary restraining order preventing O'Rourke from giving any money to the out-of-state Texas Democrats. O'Rourke then went to a rally and fundraiser afterward in Fort Worth, telling attendees to F the rules, and then Paxton tried to hold him in contempt for that statement and even have him thrown in jail for saying what he said. He also tried to revoke his PAC's charter altogether. At that point, O'Rourke countersued Paxton in El Paso County, asking for the restraining order to be dissolved. The Tarrant County judge said no, but also froze all the PAC's assets in Texas and froze the Texas-based assets of Act Blue. After that, there were competing judgments issued in 2 different counties, so the 15th Court of Appeals had to get involved. The court consists of 3 judges, all right-wing appointees of Greg Abbott's, and just a fun fact, O'Rourke challenged Greg Abbott for the governorship at one point, so he is technically like a direct adversary of Abbott's. When things didn't go his way initially, Paxton disparaged the court on social media. He said the 15th Court of Appeals was Beto-loving and full of activist judges, and he called O'Rourke an aid fraudster. O'Rourke responded on X asking, "You think the 15th Appeals Court judges appointed by Greg Abbott are working for me? You okay?" The court, when it finally issued its ruling dissolving the restraining order, said that Paxton's political ambitions were of note. Here, the state represented by the current Attorney General, who is also a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, has procured a temporary restraining order barring a political action committee supporting Democratic Party candidates from soliciting, accepting, and spending certain contributions. Tools, whether legal or political, for eliminating quorum breaks may exist, but our Texas founding fathers, like our American founding fathers, took prior restraints on political speech out of the toolkit when they enshrined the right to free speech in our Constitution. So because Paxton was suing before O'Rourke had actually done anything illegal, it was ruled that all of this was a violation of the First Amendment. For his part, Paxton has of course vowed to fight against this ruling. The law certainly wouldn't help him in his bid for Senate, although the people who support people like Trump and Paxton tend to celebrate traits like litigiousness and foolhardiness. Paxton could maybe spin this as present himself as a fighter or even as a defender of Texas politics. Alternatively, he could be seen as a big fat loser, and no one on the MAGA side likes a loser. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.